Hi, this is Christine with Zeidman Development. Today I would like to take a look at Salsa Engage as a data source with Importacular, and specifically at the activity type of peer-to-peer events. So you can see on my screen that I have pulled up my Salsa Engage data source. I have selected my activity type of peer-to-peer events. I've backdated my fetch activity from to 2 years ago just to make sure I've got sample data to pull through this import. And I have selected 2 attendees and 2 purchases per ticket just because that meets my data criteria. A couple of things to note that whether or not you have the participation destination in Importacular, you can use the peer-to-peer events. You're just limited if you do not have the participant destination. You're limited as to where you can put that data in Razor's Edge. So you're certainly welcome to put that data in other locations. If you would like to add that data to the event participants on an event record in Razor's Edge, you will need to add the event participants destination to your Importacular package. So what I'm going to show today will show the gifts as well as the registration information. And that registration information, again, is part of the participant's destination. So for the purpose of the destination, I have added 2 attendees. That way I can map my registrant and a guest. And I've also indicated that I want to add 2 number of purchases with the ticket. So if there is an additional purchase for a t-shirt or any other item that you could possibly be selling in connection with your tickets, you can pull them through this way. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK and move on to looking at our template. So you can see here that we are working with our data source. We can see how many records we have that have pulled through. And now we can either build a new template or select an existing template. I'm going to select an existing template and walk you through that once it's already built. So now that we have our template here, we can click on the pencil here to edit and to review our template. So you can see here on the first tab that it defaults to, which is our constituent tab, that I have mapped my constituent. So for the purpose of this import, that constituent is the person who bought the ticket. I've also added a constituent code, and I've added an alias of a Salsa ID. I'm going to skip over the address tab for right now because I do want to come back to that after we look at our participants. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our participant. And I want to show you a couple of pieces here. The first is that I have my event registration. Then that's got an area type of participant. Then I have a guest that also has an area type of participant. So after you create your event registration, you can create guests to link to that. I've also linked my registration fees as well as a gift. So I've linked some gifts here. So we'll take a look at what we have on participants, and then we're going to go look at our gifts and our addresses so you can see how those things have all been linked together. So let's start with event registration. So you can see here that we see a lot of the fields that are available to you in the event participate areas in Razor's Edge. So I have marked my amount paid as my purchase or ticket cost. So that's a field that I pulled directly out of Salsa, as well as my purchaser date. I've linked my event name because I knew that everyone coming through was going to my afternoon tea. But if you have something else, such as the form name, you could use your activity form name and link that and create your event names based off of something like your activity form name. So I only have one activity, I only have one form because this is sample, but if you have more than that, you can work with something like an activity form name. As with other areas in Importacular, anything that you see with this green circle with a white check mark in it is a required field, and you do need to fill something in. So I've got something there for my invitation. And then further down, I've got some information for my registration. So I don't have all of these areas filled in, but you can certainly fill in more than I have. Once you have that registration, the initial participant mapped, then you could add a guest. So that's what I've done here. And you can see that my guest is linked with that event registration, so they are connected to one another. You can see that here I've worked with the first name of attendee 2. Once you have your attendee information filled in there, you can go ahead and continue to map all of the information that you need for this guest. You will need to fill in some of the fields that you filled in on the registration, such as registration. The event name is another one, the invitation, things along those lines. Once we have a guest and our registrant, then we can also work with some areas such as adding attributes. So you could use the attribute to link something such as a dietary need or a t-shirt size, things like that. You can also create the participant registration fees. So we do have one of those set up here where you can actually link that total amount as well as the fee date, the number of units, the receipt amount, and then the type of units. So you can see here that I have added a couple of different fields here that may not actually seem to be the same as the field name itself. So that number of units I've linked to activity type. And if we click on the field settings, we can see that if my activity type said double, I can change that to a number of tickets of 2. And if it said single, I can change it to a number of tickets of 1. So you can work with those transformations in different ways throughout Importacular in order to change columns into what you need. I've also got the ticket name and things like that just so I can make this work and get everything to come through the way I need. So once you have that participation registration fees set up, if the purchase of the ticket also happened at the same time, which it generally would in Salsa, you may also want to create a gift in Razor's Edge and link that gift back to the event registration. So I'm going to come back to this final fees link. I spelled my fees and gift wrong there, but I'm going to come back to this one in just a moment, and I want to flip over to our gifts tab first. So you can see on my gifts tab, I have quite a few different mappings, and I'm going to skip over the first 3 right now, and I just want to show you this last one. So this last one is a gift mapping that I've named as registration, and this mapping is connected to those purchaser tickets. So you'll see here that the amount is the purchaser ticket. We have the purchaser date, we have the activity date, the purchaser deductible amount, we put tickets in a reference, and all of those things are connected to that ticket registration purchase. So I'm going to close that. We're going back to participants really quickly. We're going to click on the gift link here, and you can see that what I've done is I've linked that purchaser ticket amount as the applied amount, and then the import linked with, you can see here we have 2 different options. I had 2 gifts mapped on the gift tab. So the first one was a donation, and the second one is the registration. So I've linked this to the registration because the registration is what needs to be linked to those registration fees that were already mapped earlier. These are what we're talking about here. That registration fee is linked with that registration gift. So since we've looked at gifts just a little bit, let's take a quick look back at that again. So you can see I do have 2 gifts, that registration that we've already looked at and talked about that pays those registration fees. But if the person who is registering also makes an additional donation at the same time as registering, we can add that as a donation. So you can see that here I've mapped to my donation amount. I have added the campaign and fund and appeal based off of those fields. And that's going to add as a second gift. So when this import is committed, I'm actually creating 2 gifts. The batch is going to have 2 gifts for many of these constituents. The constituents who made a donation as well as the constituents who just registered. So if I both registered and made a donation, there will be 2 gifts in this batch for me. If I just registered, there would be 1 gift in the batch for me. So you can add both of those things at the same time. But when you're doing that, make sure you're picking all the fields that connect to the donation on the donation mapping and the registration on the registration mapping. So the last thing that I do want to show you is I want to come back to this address tab. So on the address tab, you can actually see here that I have 2 addresses and 2 phone numbers. And that's because I wanted to link the address to the guest. So you can see here, because I created that guest for my participant as well as my constituent, I do have a separate address for each of these, and you can tell which record it's going to in this upper right hand corner where it says import linked with. So you can see here, this is the supporter, this is that main constituent, this is that person's address. And when we open the guest, you can see here that we have all of this attendee to information, and it's linked to guest 1. And actually, I need to fill in a little bit of this information because it does seem like it didn't get saved. So we would go ahead and we would find our attendee, and we would add any address information that we have, which it does not seem that this actually has an address here. So I'm not going to add this address, but this is where we would do that if we had an address for that attendee. So let's go ahead and save this. And we do have the same thing with our email and with our guest email. So that's how we would add those different addresses and those different email addresses. And that's how you can make sure you link it to either the constituent or to their guest. So that is how we work with getting all of those mappings together. Obviously, there's a lot more detail to that, but this is just to give you a walkthrough of how that can work. Once you have your template set up, you always are going to link to a control report. I do recommend that you use a new control report every time. And then we can go ahead and click continue and process through to our review screen. So because this is a sample that I've worked with multiple times over, you can see that all of my constituents here are update. They're already in Razor's Edge. In your import, I imagine that you would have a mixture between update, create, and possibly decide. Decide meaning that ImportAcular can't tell for sure and it wants someone to review it. And there may be times where you want to ignore. So those are our different activity types here in those actions to take. We can always validate our batch and make sure that everything looks the way that we want it to. Make sure there's no error messages before we actually import. And then once we've done that, we can always uncheck the box for validate and actually commit that batch. So you have a lot of different options once you get to this point. And we do cover that information in several of our other videos. I hope that this has been helpful for you to understand things that are possible working with the peer-to-peer events. Thank you so much for your time and have a great day.